If you could pose one question to the former Attorney General, give me some help here. What would you ask?
To me, the most interesting of many interesting Ashcroft moments was the moment when he interrupted a routine Attorney General's trip to Moscow to command television time and announced that Jose Padilla was this terrorist who had the potential to basically unleash a nuclear bomb in a major American city. There are two interesting things about this. One was Padilla had been arrested almost a month earlier. So why did the Attorney General of the United States decide to hold this press conference in Moscow? And two, Jose Padilla has never been charged with anything remotely that severe since. And that was one of the signature cases of his tenure. So it'd be interesting to hear him on the subject of Mr. Padilla.
I will put that on the list. Frank Rich.
Locked up indefinitely? No lawyer? No trial? If you think this can't happen to an American citizen, think again.
We have disrupted an unfolding terrorist plot to attack the United States by exploding a radioactive dirty bomb.
I get a phone call in the car. The prosecutor calls up, he says, your client was taken by the military. And I thought they were joking.
Thank you, but no comment at this time.
Newman's client, Jose Padilla, had been held as a material witness for an entire month before Ashcroft's dramatic announcement. He had been charged with no crime, but was seen as someone who could provide information to a grand jury about 9/11. Suddenly, he was being called a terrorist.
We know that Abdullah al-Mujahir is an al-Qaeda operative.
Broadcasting live from Moscow, Ashcroft announced the arrest as if Padilla had just been caught and a terrorist act narrowly averted.
Let me be clear. We know from multiple independent and corroborating sources.
Nothing had happened from the time of his arrest 4 weeks before till his designation. And the information that they had was the same. So one has to think, okay, so then what changed?
And I wanted to point out to Director Mueller that
just prior to Ashcroft's announcement, FBI whistleblower Colleen Rowley had been appearing before Congress. She was testifying about the lack of intelligence sharing between the FBI and CIA and how they'd bungled the warnings that might have prevented 9/11.
We need to streamline the FBI's bureaucracy in order to more effectively combat terrorism.
Let me just start off by saying...
Now Rowley's issues seem passé, as the Justice Department kept emphasizing that interagency collaboration had led to Padilla's capture and the country saved from a terrorist attack.
Was a result of the close cooperative work of FBI agents and CIA agents.
Close cooperation among U.S. government agencies.
But what had all this cooperation yielded?
Within hours, 24 hours, the government then had news conferences in which they backtracked. They said, well, it wasn't really a plot, it was just like in the talking stages.
I want to emphasize again, there was not an actual plan.
There were discussions about this possible plan, and it was in the discussion stage.
It certainly wasn't at the point of having a specific target.
What's remarkable is when you read the government's papers is that they insist that the government does not have to charge Mr. Padilla with a crime.
They don't really have any evidence of any crime. They have a notion that he might have met with people from al-Qaeda, but they don't think he's a member, and they've said so in court papers.
So what was the sudden urgency? The cynical among us might believe it was to deflect Rowley's damaging information. The government wasn't saying. And with Padilla now locked up in solitary confinement in a naval brig in South Carolina, he wasn't able to explain anything either. Some information about Padilla began to surface. As a teenager in Chicago, Padilla's involvement in a murder committed by an older gang member landed him in juvenile detention. He later moved to Florida, and when he was 21, he went to prison for 10 months after firing a gun into the air during an argument. Upon his release, he converted to the Islamic faith at a center known for preaching nonviolence. Over the next 10 years, his only run-ins with the law were for minor traffic violations. His new religion would take him to the Middle East, where he married his second wife. On a return trip to the United States, he was taken into custody.
Mr. Padilla was arrested at Chicago O'Hare Airport. He was initially detained under the Material Witness Statute, and only after they could no longer hold him under that statute did they then label him as an enemy combatant.
Padilla's activities and his association with al-Qaeda make him an enemy combatant.
An enemy combatant. I didn't, where did you make up that term? You know, I really had never heard of it.
I thought the administration's rules on military tribunals said they would be only for non-American citizens. Is the whole point of holding him as a military combatant to be able to question him without using conventional criminal process?
His status, as the Attorney General said in his statement, is as an enemy combatant. He is being detained under the laws of war as an enemy combatant.
And if the president labels them an enemy combatant, or in President Bush's words, a bad guy, they can be held indefinitely, incommunicado, without a hearing, without charges.
Congress has already ruled on this. Congress said, you can't ever use our military for domestic law enforcement purposes. We don't want you doing that. We don't want you to use the military to arrest citizens. We don't want martial law. And this president and this attorney general said, I don't have to follow the rules.
Does he have legal representation at the moment?
He was being held under the authority of a federal judge, and he had legal representation in connection with that, yes.
Larry, how far did they get?
I called the Department of Defense. I even called the White House. I got the response. He will not be able to call me. I will not be able to call him. I will not be able to visit him. And while, of course, I can write to him, they would not guarantee that he would receive my mail.
Although the government now claims that Padilla may have been involved in a plot to blow up apartment buildings, they have provided no evidence, nor charged him with a crime.
The detention of an American citizen indefinitely without counsel is based not only on hearsay, could be triple hearsay for all we know, but they admit that one of the individuals who gave the information has lied to them in the past, has his own agenda for giving information, and the other informant, in quotes, recanted.
We've never in the history of the United States had investigative detention. We don't do that, you know, except now we do.
Recently, the Supreme Court decided that enemy combatants such as the Guantanamo prisoners and Jose Padilla have the right to an attorney and access to a court of law. It remains to be seen how the government will comply with this ruling.
Putting terror suspects on trial, President Bush set to sign the terror detainee bill. It lays out the rules for questioning and prosecuting key detainees. That includes big fish, al-Qaeda suspects. Live now to White House correspondent Elaine Quijano for more on this. We're about 2 minutes away, Elaine.
Good morning to you, Heidi. Well, that's right. With just 3 weeks to go until the congressional midterm elections, what we're about to see here is the image that President Bush wants voters to keep in mind as they head to the polls. Members of the Republican-led Congress not just talking tough about the war on terror, but taking action, giving him legislation to try and treat terror detainees. Now, what the president wants to move beyond is the very public and bitter division within the GOP from a few weeks ago on this very issue. You'll recall that it was the so-called renegade Republican senators, John McCain, John Warner, and Lindsey Graham, who so staunchly opposed the White House on this very issue. Of course, there was a compromise that was reached eventually with the administration, but the fight exposed a very deep GOP rift on something that's traditionally been a signature issue for Republicans, and that is, of course, national security. So today we expect to see those same senators at this event in the East Room, the signing ceremony, Heidi, very much intended to present a united Republican front in the fight on terrorism at a critical time in the election season. And of course, this is taking a page, if you will, right out of the Republican election playbook to tout the party's national security credentials ahead of the election.
And now, in memory of the victims of September the 11th, it is my honor to sign the Military Commissions Act of 2006 into law.
Well, there you have it, President Bush signing the Military Commissions Act of 2006. Applause, as we might expect. A very similar speech to the one he gave a few weeks ago talking about this same act.